I want to begin with more class warfare from the Biden White House. I've talked about this, but I got to talk about it again. In particular, I want to target a New York Times story that ran over the weekend. The headline, under Biden, Democrats are poised to raise taxes on business and the rich. Wow, fallacy after fallacy in this article, mistake after mistake. I'm going to give it 100 Pinocchios. The only truth in the article I can find is the assertion that President Biden wants the largest tax increase since 1942. He may not get it, but he wants it. Now, I do agree with that reporting. Various estimates run upwards of about $3 trillion. Now comes a bunch of one-sided falsehoods. The largest tax increase since 1942 would bolster the economy's performance and repair a tax code that Democrats say encourage wealthy people to hoard assets and big companies to ship jobs and book profits overseas. Wow. Where did that come from? There's got to be a fact someplace. When President Trump slashed the corporate tax rate from 35 to 21%, he made America competitive in the global race for capital and business hospitality. Instead of shipping jobs overseas in the form of inversions, remember the inversions? U.S. companies would acquire foreign firms, and then they'd all domicile in the overseas country that had the lower tax rate. Think Ireland, that's just one example. And so-called book profits, which, by the way, is a poor measure of profits, but whatever, in any event, over $1 trillion of U.S. corporate profits that was held overseas to avoid double taxation were, in fact, repatriated, far beyond CBO estimates. In fact, the corporate tax cut paid for itself by 2019, less than 2 years after it was signed into law. So I don't really understand the New York Times on this. How about some facts? Now, another whopper from the Times. Quote, Mr. Biden has stressed his broad-brush desire to increase the tax burden on wealthy Americans who, get this, listen to this, who largely earn their money through inheritance or investment, end quote. Now, I don't know who to blame more, President Biden or the New York Times. So I'm just going to blame both of them. The Times should have balanced this Biden assertion by talking to some economists who disagree. So let's think of wealthy Americans now who made their money through inheritance or investment. Now, there's nothing wrong with making money through investment because investment generates the cash to start brand new companies that can create millions of new jobs. Warren Buffett bought his first stock when he was 11 years old. He finally hit $1 million at age 30. I dare say, on balance, he's been a big job creator. What's wrong with Buffett? Nothing. Investment? Nothing. But how about some other names who did not inherit, but formed spectacular companies that boosted the economy, provided millions of jobs, benefited consumers everywhere? How about Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer of Microsoft? How about Jeff Bezos of Amazon? How about Steve Jobs of Apple? How about Mike Bloomberg of Bloomberg LP? For that matter, how about Andrew Carnegie of U.S. Steel? How about John D. Rockefeller of Standard Oil? How about Thomas Edison, who founded the Edison Electric Company that wound up being morphed into General Electric? These people did not inherit their wealth. In fact, they created massive wealth through their genius and their entrepreneurship. In fact, the market research firm WealthX has done several studies of wealth sources, and they find that 58% of billionaire wealth was self-made. Only 12.4% was inherited. And yet, President Biden said at his news conference last week, and I quote, "We need to start to reward work, not just wealth," end quote. And his press secretary, Madam Psaki, had something similar to say today about changing the tax code. Take a listen.
But he also believes that we have an opportunity to rebalance, to address our tax code that is out of date, and some could pay more in our country that are not currently.
Yeah, well, I'm sure some could pay more. But the reality is the top earners in the U.S. already pay the vast bulk of income taxes. including payroll taxes, they probably pay close to 50% of federal taxation. When you include state and local sales taxes and property taxes, and then capital gains taxes, and then small business LLC wholly owned proprietorship type taxes, the most successful earners in America probably pay about 60% of the taxes. Indeed, the U.S. has one of the most progressive tax systems in the world. And it is now so boring for Mr. Biden or the New York Times to keep saying the Trump tax cuts only benefited the rich. I and so many others have repeatedly debunked this. We have noted that the bottom 25% got the most benefits from the Trump tax cuts. In fact, the two bottom quintiles of blue-collar middle-income and lower middle-income folks, those who needed it the most, got the most benefits. Well over 50% of those benefits. And then wage rates have increased much faster for this group than for the top earners. And poverty fell, and inequality fell, and unemployment fell to 50-year lows, including African Americans, Asian Americans, women. These are facts. They're from the Census Bureau, the Federal Reserve. It's all well established. It's easy to find. And this whole mealy-mouthed attack on Trump is just silly nonsense. When JFK and Reagan slashed tax rates, the same things happened. Those who needed it the most got the biggest benefits. Now, if you're going to tell me a $3 trillion tax hike is going to help grow the economy, then I'm going to tell you that is just plain wrong. Use your common sense. Forget philosophy and ideology. Please, just common sense. The long and the short of it, whatever far-left Democrats believe, is that the Biden administration is profoundly anti-business. What they will never understand is that a working folks' best friend, the working folks' best friend is exactly investors who supply new capital to supply new businesses and promote higher wages through huge job creation. Let's not make this any harder than it needs to be. You can't have a good paying job without a healthy business. But if you're taxing and regulating businesses to death, you're going to extinguish healthy jobs, millions of them. In other words, business is labor's best friend. And to get the work done and produce, labor is business's best friend. They both work together to benefit the entire country. And finally, if you think jacking up the corporate tax rate is going to keep America competitive, think again. At a 28% rate, which is 25% considering, which is 32% considering state and federal, we'd have the highest corporate tax rate among developed OECD countries. China would have a lower rate at 25. That means factories will leave this place, profits will scatter to the four corners of the globe, and American workers are going to become America last, not first. Pure and simple. The Biden approach is just class warfare. That is really their agenda. In a futile effort to redistribute income, they want to tax successful businesses and entrepreneurs. They don't really care about economic growth. They are only interested in this left-wing social policies, violating the American dream, violating American traditions, going all the way back to the Founding Fathers. They want to punish success. That runs completely against the American dream. One thing about Donald Trump, he understood the need to reward success, not punish it. And if you punish success, you're going to punish the economy. You're going to punish business. You're going to punish workers. You're going to punish middle-class families. You're going to jeopardize the national security of this great country. We have tried these left-wing nostrums before. Socialists around the world have used it, and it has never worked. And I don't know why now, once again, this is necessary to prove what we already know. Punishing success is always doomed to failure.